Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Orange Wine Seminar. This was a big hit last year. Everybody was excited about orange wine, so I figured I would do it again because it's always fun. It's an interesting, I think, topic to talk about. So I'm just opening up. I have some open bottles, but I'm opening up a bottle of the Sasara Coconut orange right here, right there. Let's see, I'm gonna hop over to, I sent out a handout. Actually, okay, before I do anything, I should, for the video, for clarity, just to make sure everybody has it. So the wines that we are tasting, the wines I chose to illustrate and explain orange wine are, in order of the samples. Number one, Sasara Coconut Orange, Conestable della Staffa Arancio here. So both Italian. Sasara is from up in the Veneto. The Arancio from Conestable della Staffa from Danilo, that's down in Umbria in central Italy. Then Alfredo Maestro Albilo Lovamore. There we go. It's weird looking at it backwards with the camera, the mirror effect, but Lovamore. So a Spanish orange wine from up in the central, like, what is it, Meseta Centrale of Spain, so up sort of like outside of Madrid. Then Cacique Maravilla Naranja from Chile, from Bio Bio. And then what would an orange wine tasting be without a Georgian Amphora orange wine? And this is Nine Oaks. This is a project from Kakheti in Georgia, made from Kiwi is the grape variety there. So it's a broad range. Anyway, okay, so orange wine. Orange wine is a term that has started, that's been thrown around. I feel like orange wine, I started getting more and more questions about it like 3-ish years ago, something like that. And orange wine has just become, as more people have gotten into wine and gotten a little bit more experienced and are open to other new different things, people have gotten interested in orange wine because it is very different from mainstream white, red, and rosé. It's not a technical term. Orange wine is wine made from grapes, made from white grapes, but instead of like normal white wines, mainstream white wines, conventional white wines, grapes are picked and the juice is taken away immediately. They're pressed and the juice is taken away so that you just have that fresh, pure grape juice, and it doesn't sit on the skins to pick up tannin, whatever polyalcohols, to pick up other flavors and chemical components. You just have that clean, fresh grape juice with acidity and sugar primarily. But orange wine, because it's not a technical term, there's no line in the sand of this is orange wine and this is not orange wine. So the Arancio here, I think, spends 7 days on the skin. The Lovamore, the Albilo, spends 10 days. The Coconut spends 2 months. I think the Cacique Maravilla spends 2 months. And I haven't even looked to see. I think the Georgian, the Kiwi, might also be like 2 months. But I think the Arancio and the Coconut are both in like fiberglass or plastic tanks. The Naranja is aged in, I believe, cement open top vats. And then Kiwi is aged in, it sits in big unsealed clay amphora. And I don't actually even remember off the top of my head what the Lovamore ages in. It might be a mix of barrels and stainless steel. So depending on the vessel that you age the wine in, that has a huge impact on it. So you have some quote unquote orange wines where they were in a sealed tank, you know, or they were in like a stainless steel tank with a lid that basically floats on the top of the wine. So there's almost no oxygen in there. And so the wine, even though there's skin contact, there's not a lot of oxygen, so it doesn't oxidize. Then you have orange wines where, you know, maybe it's only a week of skin contact, but if it's in an open vat or something like that, or if it's in like an old barrel and the barrel isn't topped up, that's going to have a big impact. That's going to change the biological process. You know, some people, there's, when you have the skins, when you have the wine on the skins, that solid matter is going to float up to the top, and you have to do something about that. You don't necessarily want it to just totally dry out, because then it may get weird and create other odd flavors. So some people will punch it down. Some people, if maybe it's in an open vat, and then it's real easy to just punch the wine down. If it's in like a cement tank, then you can close it up most of the time, but usually there's a hatch on the top, so you can climb up on top of the tank, open the hatch, punch it down once or twice or 3 times a day, however much the winemaker wants to do that. Other people will submerge, they'll use like a metal grate, and they will submerge that into the wine, and that will force the skins and the matter all down into the fermenting wine. So it keeps it all wet, but and you don't have to worry about it drying out, but at the same time, you don't have to work it. You don't have to punch it down. And I'm gonna just, because I can, go to screen share. Actually, I don't even know if I've put all these pictures on my, there's a ton of pictures of me in Umbria this past autumn, punching down grapes in open vats, but I actually don't think I've put those on my computer yet. Here's, I have to do this a different way. Oh, there we go. So there's a concrete tank. There I am, like punching grapes down in a concrete tank. Let's see if I can find. Anyway, the more that you work the skins, the more that you punch them down, the more you agitate them, the more tannin, the more stuff, you know, you force out of them and force into the wine. So you know, that's why some people will submerge a grate to hold all the skins down, and then it's more like the process of making tea. It's like an infusion where you have the skins and everything's in there, and the wine soaking into it, but you're not working it aggressively and manually forcing chemical compounds and tannins and stuff out of them. And then also how the grapes are handled. You know, are they destemmed? Did they throw the whole clusters in, and then you have a bunch of stems in there, and the stems communicate extra tannins and maybe more green tannins, stuff like that. So anyway, I'm just saying, orange wine is really complicated. And if somebody walks up to you and just says like, hey, I love orange wines, that's, I don't know, that's kind of vague. That's like somebody walking into a restaurant and being like, hey, I love food. I'd like to order some things off the menu. Give me some whatever you have. You know, it's not a whole lot of guidance. I feel like the other thing so that's, I think, important to recognize. And you just don't know until you talk to people about what they think orange wine is. You know, some people, when they say orange wine, they want really crazy, oxidative, like skin contacty, wild wines. But then other people are totally put off by that, and they're thinking of something that's like lighter and it has some texture and body, but it's not oxidative. It's not as complicated. It's not as far of a deviation from the sort of like mainstream white wine. Also, I think kind of important to talk about, it feels like orange wine it's a fad. It feels like orange wine is a new thing, you know, but fads, I think of fads as just sort of being like the initial people discovering or rediscovering things. It's like an initial people getting excited about stuff. It doesn't necessarily, fads don't just go away. People aren't going to forget about orange wines in 2 years just like people haven't forgotten about natural wine. It just sort of evolves, and people get more more aware, educated. People get more experienced, and it sort of loses its hip fadness, and hopefully just sort of like enters normal mainstream culture, wine culture in this case. So orange wine feels like a fad. A lot of people think it's this new thing, like, oh my God, wow, this is so crazy, like aging white wine on the skins. You know, it's basically making wine from white grapes the same way that you make red wine. You know, red wines, conventional red wines that ferment aerobically, usually have 2, maybe 3 weeks of skin contact, and that's where all the color comes from, all of the tannin, a lot of the flavor, a lot of the secondary, tertiary, interesting flavors that they have. So it's making white wine in the same way. But a good thing to remember is that, you know, before stainless steel tanks, before rubber hoses, before I mean, I guess that's what I'm talking about, stainless steel tanks and rubber hoses and temperature control, it was really hard to make what we today think of as conventional white wines, like dry, crisp, focused, zippy New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs and super dry, crisp Muscatels and stuff like that. Because, you know, in the absence of those things, when winemakers only had wooden barrels and clay amphora to work with, and you know, like open wooden big puncheons that were open on the top, or like stone troughs, you know, the way that the vast majority of wine was made like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago was somebody just taking a big gigantic stone that was mostly flat, and with just terrible brute manual labor grinding away at it to make a trough in it, and then you just throw whole grape clusters in there, and you'd walk around on them and mush them all up, and then maybe you'd have a little channel cut in the stone, and it would drain into another trough, and then it would just ferment there with wild yeast. You know, there was no way to keep it from oxidizing, and you had to make your white wine with skin contact because the presence of tannins helps stabilize the wine, letting it be exposed to oxygen, letting it go through secondary malolactic fermentation, having there be the presence of tannins, that stabilizes it. If a winemaker 300 years ago had tried to just like immediately take the juice away somehow and put it in some kind of vessel, in the absence of a lot of the modern technology that we take for granted now, the wine would be a lot less stable, and it would last a much shorter period of time, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So the reason that, so orange wine used to be the default when you were making wine from white grapes, you know, and going back to what I was talking about initially, there's all these different ways of making orange wine. So, you know, you can absolutely make orange wines, and we're going to taste some here, that are pretty fresh and that are refreshing and relatively easy drinking and lighter, you know, that are great, refreshing, that do the things that we expect white conventional mainstream white wine to do today. You could do that. But my point just is that like 200-300 years ago, I think that to an extent, orange wine was just the default. And then as we developed all these new technologies, we moved away from that. But then more recently, there have always been pockets, there have always been places that didn't give up those traditional old school methods, because wine is culture. Culture, you know, is interwound with wine. And so there are a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of winemakers that like, why would you give up this thing that you grew up with and just change to some kind of new technology because it exists? So Georgia has gotten a lot of attention because Georgia, you know, is a place that sort of never gave up its skin contact orange wine sort of, you know, way of making wine, because yes, they were behind the Iron Curtain for a long time, but also they were like a rural backwater of the Iron Curtain, and they made wine. There, all the commercial winemaking was controlled by the state, you know, command and control economy. It was all controlled by the state. It was all big government co-ops making the wine, and that was all crap. But individual people kept making wines for themselves to preserve their cultural identity, and they all just kept making wine, in buried amphora behind their houses and in sheds and stuff like that. So, they never let go of it. So that's part of why Georgia in a way sort of kept the flame alive, and then people went to Georgia and tasted these wines and were blown away because they were so different. But there were people in Spain still making wine like that. There were people up in northern Italy, up in the Julian Alps, making wine like that. Radicon, was someone that kept the traditions alive. We have a whole bunch of Radicon that just haven't actually gotten around to telling anybody, but Radicon. So it's one of those things where it's like what used to be old is now new again and has turned into like a hip new thing. And with that, I'm going to start tasting wines here. So first up, this is the Sasara Coconut Orange. This is the very first vintage that they've made of this. Sasara is a winery that has existed, or vineyards that have existed for a while. I want to say it was like 10 years ago that this couple, where are they? Doesn't even have their names on here. Stefano, Alessia and Stefano. So they inherited, I think it was Alessia's family's vineyards up here in the Veneto. And so they sort of like took over the vineyards, and you can see there, like you can see it's on a slope, it's rocky, it's a lot of sedimentary rock here. They took over the vineyards, they started making wine. Here they are up there by Garda, just east of Brescia. So they started making wine, but they were just, sort of continued making the wine the way that their family had been. And I don't know, they weren't doing anything unusual or special, and they weren't particularly inspired by the wines that they were making, I think. And then they started to sort of learn about the natural wine, whatever movement, tasting other different wines and stuff. And eventually they connected with Danilo Marcucci and started talking to him, and he came and looked at their vineyards, and he was super impressed and interested by their vineyards. And so they worked out an agreement where he started teaching them how to make wine without interventions. I think they had always been farming organically, but they leaned into that, and then he started teaching them how to make wine without temperature control, without adding sulfur, without filtering, without all of that. So let me go grab a dump bucket. I just realized that I don't have a dump bucket here. So this is 100% Garganega, Garganica, I believe is how I should actually be pronouncing that. 100% Garganica. This is 2 months of skin maceration. Spontaneous fermentation, no temperature control, aged in stainless steel. I don't know if there's any actual pictures. I haven't been here to their winery yet. Okay, there you go. All right, so initial fermentation in those open, like 3,000 liter, I believe those are, tanks, and then into stainless steel. It looks like they have some little concrete tanks over there against that wall there too. But so this is stainless steel. So this is kept topped up. There's not a lot of air in there, so this is not oxidative. And also, this is 10% alcohol.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is one of Danilo's things. If you're not adding sulfur, if you can make wine that has a lower pH, has more acidity, then the wine will be more stable even without sulfur added to it. And he talks a lot about mineralizing the wine, transferring, communicating the minerality from the soil to the wine. And to that end, he prunes the vines usually to produce more grapes. So he produces more to dilute the sugar content of them and allow more like acidity and minerality and stuff like that to come through in the wine. So that's how you arrive at 10% alcohol here. It smells kind of like tropical fruit. It smells like a mix between like ripe melon, like honeydew or something, like, I don't know, honeydew melon. Alternatively, maybe like ripe sort of sweet squash, like roasted squash. Also kind of orangey. On the palate, it's got really nice acidity. Like it is a fresh, like sort of focused linear wine. It doesn't have that much tannin to it. So I don't know if, you know, if these were destemmed grapes or, you know, what the process was, but they can't have been punching this down and stirring it up a whole lot. And also, I can't imagine that it was whole cluster, that there were stems in there. And then also, in my experience, Garganica is usually like a less, I don't know, is a less concentrated grape variety anyway. So they're sort of using that to their advantage here. I don't feel that much tannin on my palate from this. But it does, like on the mid palate, it has a sort of like pithiness. There's like a, it makes me think of the pulp, like orange pulp. It makes me think of fruit pith or meat to it. So that was 2 months. And then, what is this? Arancio, 10 days. Okay, so then 10 days of skin contact in identical 3,000 liter open plastic fermentation vats here. This is Danilo. I'll stop screen share so I can hold that up. The Arancio. This is 100% Trebbiano, but it's 3 different clones of Trebbiano. It's Trebbiano Spoletino, Trebbiano Giallo. Which Trebbianos is this? Trebbiano Spoletino, Trebbiano Abruzzo, and Trebbiano Toscano. Okay. 10 days of skin contact, and then pressed off in a, you know, in a vertical press and basically a basket press into fiberglass tanks, big upright fiberglass tanks that have a top that, you know, can raise or lower to make sure that it's right at the level of the wine. And for the fun of it, I'll hop back over here to screen share. I wonder, I actually kind of wish that I had. Here. So here's some pictures of the vineyards. I don't think these are Trebbiano vines. I'm pretty sure those are like Ciliegiolo or something like that. But they're pruning. We were cutting off some arms, bending the rest down to get them to grow out, grow across. Not that you can really pick up a whole lot of interesting stuff from this, but you can sort of see that, like, this is not high elevation, but it's exposed here sideways. in this little like bowl surrounded by hills. It smells spicier. More sort of peachy. Ah, there's a fiberglass tank. That's a bigger one that I think he always uses for red wine, but that's the kind of tank that he's using. Let's see if I can find a better picture of the winery. Maybe not. Maybe I don't have other pictures of the winery in here. There's some more fiberglass tanks. I think that's probably like exactly the type of tank that this is fermented in. Like the Sasara, this is fermented without temperature control and 0 sulfur added to it. It smells more like ripe tropical fruit. It smells a little spicy, like it reminds me of cooked or canned peach or something like that, and also a little bit of pineapple. Richer, riper, spicier. There's more tannin. This is 11.5% alcohol, so significantly riper grapes went into this. Both vineyards, I think, are pretty like sedimentary soil. The vineyard where the Sasara comes from is definitely cooler. Even just looking at the color in the glass, this has more orangey color. I would guess that this has more skin contact, but it doesn't. Now down to Spain. This is sort of a departure. Alfredo Maestro. I kind of actually want. I can go back to the Alfredo Maestro page here. Yes, great. So this is Lovamore. This is 100% Albilo, and this is Albilo Mayor, which is there are multiple different versions of Albilo that are genetically different, like Trebbiano. So this is Albilo Mayor, which is, I think, indigenous to this area, sort of like outside of Madrid and over by Ribera del Duero. This is 60 to 120-year-old vines on clay and limestone up at between, getting close to 1,000 meters above sea level in Ribera del Duero. This is fermented in steel with wild yeast for about a week of skin contact, about 7 days, then aged in tank over the winter when the temperatures are naturally really cold. And when liquid gets cold, boy, I forget what that is. It's not the specific gravity. Getting really cold, it decreases how much matter can be diffused in the liquid. So if you get liquid really cold, it forces, if it's a heterogeneous mixture, it forces everything out of the liquid. So you can clarify wines naturally by just getting them cold, and everything sort of settles to the bottom. So that's what he sort of just naturally lets the winery get cold over the winter. So that naturally clarifies it, and then I believe that's it, and then he just bottles it. Here's some pictures. There's Alfredo Maestro. So he came from the Basque, his family came from the Basque countryside, so he'd sort of grown up around winemaking. They moved to Ribera del Duero, and he was already interested in winemaking, so he decided to try and become a winemaker. Some friends encouraged him, and he bought a small vineyard, but he didn't know how to make wine. That's classic Ribera del Duero, like super, super exposed, hot, rocky, old bush vines. Some friends encouraged him to start making wine, so he bought a winery, bought a vineyard, but he didn't know how to make wine, so he basically sort of taught himself from a book. And from the beginning, he was farming organically, but because he was just making wine like the way that he was reading in this winemaking guide, it said, like, add engineered yeast, use these enzymes, filter it again, add sulfur and stuff. And he do all these corrections, add acidity, stuff like that. And at a point, he was like, why am I'm farming organically, and then I'm manipulating the wine and adding all these chemicals and stuff in the winery. And I think he didn't even really like the wines a whole lot that he was making, but he was trying to make. Back when he started in the late 90s, Ribera del Duero had just sort of been, quote unquote, discovered internationally. And people were like, oh yeah, it's like the next Rioja. Like, they make these super dark, inky, extracted red wines. It's so awesome, and like, it was the Robert Parker fever and stuff. And everybody wanted like big, inky, fruit bomb, high alcohol wines. And so that's what they were trying to make in Ribera del Duero. And he just sort of went along with the crowd until he didn't anymore. He was like, this is dumb. I'm going to do my own thing. So he started experimenting with not adding anything in the winery, with not adding sulfur, and it worked. And he liked the wines more. And so then he just, leaned into that and kept doing it. Let's see. So 7 days, ferments in stainless steel tanks, and 2 used French oak barrels. And then he lets it rest. And then he bottles it. That tech sheet says it's 12.5% alcohol. This bottle says that it's 13.5% alcohol. I'm going to go probably with more like 13.5% alcohol. It has some tannin, but the tannins aren't like a primary component. They don't taste out of place. And the wine has such nice acidity. It says here that he doesn't let it go through malolactic fermentation. I assume just because it's too cold over the winter when it's sort of finishing up fermentation and aging. But it definitely tastes like it still has that fresh citrusy quality that you get from malic acid that you lose after you go through malolactic fermentation and you wind up with lactic acid. It really reminds me of like serious white Burgundy. It reminds me of serious white Burgundy, or some of my favorite aligotés that I've had. It has a little bit more tannin, but other than that, like it's sunny. It's got great focus and structure. I think a lot of people you could pour this for people and they wouldn't even realize that this was quote unquote an orange wine, that this has 7 weeks of skin contact. Probably helps that this is, it's hand harvested, destemmed, it's destemmed right off the bat first. So, maybe it's a little bit more gentle. Maybe he doesn't work it that much, and that's why it doesn't communicate as much tannin. To the wine. I love this. I have discovered that I'm a really big fan of Alvila, particularly from places like this, from high elevation central Spain, around Madrid up in the mountains. Next wine, Cacique Maravilla, Naranja. Naranja is Spanish for orange, so you know it's orange wine. This is it says it's Muscatel de Alandria. I want to say it has like a tiny bit of Corinto and maybe Tarantelle in it, but it's like 90% Muscatel. So anyway, this is from Chile, from Bio Bio, which I was just talking about last week in last week's seminar, and I didn't use any wines from Manuel Moraga, from Cacique Maravilla. I think maybe I touched on him, but I used all kinds of other wines from down here, but not from Manuel. Let me find, where's my pictures? All right. Here are his vineyards. It's pretty volcanic soil, actually. Bio Bio down in southern Chile. This is like 300 something kilometers south of Santiago. All of Chile. You have the Andes on one side, and then you have the coastal range of mountains right along the Pacific. And most of the agriculture happens in the Central Valley, the valley in between the two mountain ranges. The coastal range blocks influence from the Pacific. And so it's actually it's warmer and more continental than you would expect for being right by the ocean, except for down here in Bio Bio and Itata, where the coastal range, there's a gap. The coastal range just ends right about here. You can see like the last hills, and then there's nothing. There's the ocean, and then it starts up again and continues on south. But so this spot here in the Central Valley, Itata and Bio Bio, is cooler and a little bit more influenced by the ocean. I want to say those were Malbec vines. There's Manuel Moraga, just being Manuel Moraga, talking about how much he loves his vineyards and stuff. I will find, I harvested a bunch of Muscatel de Alejandría here while I was there. So there's some good pictures here, I think. Yeah, there I am. So I think this is how most Muscatel is traditionally grown in Chile. They're bush vines. They're right down on the ground, and the grapes are just there, right on the ground. Just a little old hillside vineyard, just owned by some old guy. There's no it's not certified organic, but he doesn't spray it he doesn't do anything to it because there's just no financial incentive, and the vines grow so easily and are so healthy that they just grow and do their thing and produce grapes. And so that's basically what this wine is made from. And this spends 2 months on the skins in, picture of one, in open vats that look, here's a cement trough. I forget if Manuel Moraga has any cement troughs that he uses for this. I think it might have all been in plastic tubs like that, but like that, just crushed grapes, just open to the air, fermenting, fizzing, yellow jackets flying around everywhere, stirring it, punching it down maybe once a day. And so the cap definitely helps protect it from getting particularly oxidized. Muscatel is so aromatic and perfumey. I mean, I smell this and it's a gorgeous, powerful aroma. It smells like orange and pineapple, but it's just so much more powerful and more pervasive than the other wines were. It smells like perfume. On the palate, you get that fruit flavor, and then you get a little bit of spice, and there's a little bit of like a herbal aromatic spice to it, like a herbal like cool heat. It makes me think of like shishito leaves or something like that. Like a cool, spicy, a little bit like Thai basil or something.
Mm-hmm.
Muscat is one of the oldest cultivated grape varieties. Genetically, just from genetic testing, it seems like Muscat goes way, 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 way back. And this is how people must have been making wine from Muscat, 2,000 years ago. Because if you've ever had a Muscat, and they exist, people every now and then, like people try to make dry, still table wines from Muscat, and Muscat never has that much acidity. When you try to make a normal, mainstream, no skin contact white wine from Muscat, it's always flat and flabby and boring. It's always weird and unbalanced. But when you make a skin contact wine from Muscat, then you have that texture and the body, the mid palate and the finish, that little bit of tannin and the spiciness from the skin contact to offset that super tropical expressive fruit. And it makes complete sense. This is how Muscat should be made. This is how Muscat really works and is delicious. I can just imagine people, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, like the Roman legions that marched around eating boiled, corn, cheese, and bacon, all boiled and cooked all together, and just eating that for like most of their meals, and eating like semi-rotten, dried out meat and stuff like that, and then tasting something like this, and it would just blow people's minds. This is zero sulfur. This is very much nothing added, no manipulation at all. This is just wild grapes put into a fermenter and then into a bottle. That's definitely on the kind of crazy spectrum of orange wines. Like that, I feel like, is if people want like orange wine that really is very clearly not at all like normal mainstream white wine, that does the trick. But again, that's also, they've been, so Manuel Moraga, his family has been here making wine since 1776, and they've always made wine like this. Like this is how they were taught. This is, when his family came over from Spain as colonists, like that's how they knew how to make wine, and they brought Muscat with them and just kept on making wine like this here. So it's not like he read some articles in the New York Times in like Eric Asimov and was like, oh, orange wine, yeah, I can do that, this is the new thing. That's just what his family has always done, and he just kept on doing it. The wines that he makes very consciously intentional, very traditional wines. He has a pet nat that is bottled, when it's not done fermenting, and he intentionally bottles it. It's harvested very early, Pais, and then bottled really early while it's still fermenting, and it just keeps fermenting in the bottle. And it's like 10% alcohol. It's like still semi-sweet when he releases it, and all of the bottles explode when you open them. But he does that because that's what they have always done. They would every year, going back a couple generations, they would harvest really early at the beginning of the season, and they would make this wine, and then they would have a harvest festival at the end of the harvest in the autumn, and they would drink this wine that was like still fermenting in the bottles. It was like weird and sweet and crazy and stuff. And so he still makes that. even though it's super hard to sell because the bottles all explode when you open them. But he does that because he doesn't want to give up that cultural connection. Which brings us to the Georgian wine here. So this is, let me go. Stop screen share. So 9 Oaks, Kikwi from Kakheti. Let me grab my atlas. I'm not even sure if my atlas here has a map of Georgia. I kind of hope that it does. Georgia has 2 primary winemaking regions in it, which are completely different. It should have Georgia in it. If it doesn't, it's going to be vaguely annoyed. Wow. Okay, it's got former Soviet republics on page 260. This is the Hugh Johnson, Jancis Robinson, the World Atlas of Wine. It's the 5th edition, so this is like 20 years old. Page 260. Let's see, Romania, Georgia, does it cover Georgia? This is totally probably going to be impossible to look at if I just hold it up to the computer. All right, so there's in Georgia, the northern border of Georgia is a mountain range. This says it's the Bolshoi Kavkaz Mountains. So you have this mountain range running across a large portion of the country. Over in the west, it is open to the Black Sea. And then in the east, which is where Kakheti is all the way over in the east in sort of like the eastern corner of the country. You have mountains, but then you also have like flat-ish land, but it's high elevation, sort of like dry desert up here. And that's Kakheti. That's where this comes from. That's where most of the orange wine comes from in Georgia. The other wine regions in Georgia that are over in the west, that are closer to the Black Sea, it's more fertile land, it's wetter, it's somewhat lower elevation. And I don't think there is the tradition of winemaking like this there. I think the winemaking there is different and a little bit more modern, a little bit more mainstream. The higher elevation here and the dryness of the climate, I think makes it easier to make wines like this. So let's see. Here's some general pictures. So here's some of the pictures of the amphora. So these are significantly larger amphora than like the Spanish amphora, which are what a lot of people in Western Europe use, are sort of like slightly smaller traditional amphora from Spain. That's like the amphora at Kos, the amphora that Frank Cornelissen uses on Etna. Yeah, in Georgia, they use these larger, fatter, bigger amphora. And you can see they're here, and then they're sort of like, they have stones and like some kind of like plaster or something piled around them to hold them in place. So this is, I mean, 9 Oaks, it sounds, I mean, I'm sure that this is basically made for export. But I've been looking at Georgian wine and going to tastings and learning about Georgian wine and stuff for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years or something like that now. And I had a lot of wines that were interesting, but didn't quite blow me away or like live up to the hype. And then others that were just super expensive. And I just had never found anything that I really like, I don't know, really, really loved until I found this, until I found Nine Oaks. And so I think this is a project that's sort of for export, but the winemaker, this guy, Mumaka Kurtsidze, is a really experienced, really traditional, really great winemaker. And they're making the wine in a very, very classic, very traditional way. Yeah. Practicing organic, yeah. Yeah, basically, I mean, a lot of this just sort of says what I was saying, that people had kept on making wine, because also, you know, this is high elevation, dry, high desert up in the mountains, sort of against the mountains over towards the Caspian Sea, and it borders Dagestan and Chechnya. So it was very much a little bit of like a rural backwater of the Soviet world. So people here, you know, sort of were free to continue making wine personally, privately, in the way that they had, in the way that they wanted. It's nothing actually useful or interesting. Let's see. So destemmed, naturally fermented. They macerate and ferment on the skins for up to 28 days in 5,600 liter kvevery at a steady temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm guessing that building that they're in is temperature controlled. But that's a relatively warm temperature for allowing fermentation. Like when people that are making conventional white wine usually ferment at lower temperatures. They try to chill it down to make it fresher and maintain some of the like brighter, fresher, cleaner aromatics. So this is racked a couple of times into other kvevery and into steel tanks, just to sort of naturally like take it off the lees, to sort of naturally make it a little clearer and cleaner. Has a lot of apricot to it.
Mm.
It has a lot of apricot. It has, I guess, the most tannins of any of these wines that we've tasted today so far. It has some sort of baked good flavors to it, like a little bit like baking bread, baking puffed pastry. It makes me think of like a baking peach tart, kind of buttery, a little like the flavor of browned butter. But it's clean. Like to me, this is clean. To me, there's nothing that I taste that I would point to and say like this is a flaw. Like there's this wine isn't flawed. This wine is just completely outside of what most people think of white wine being. And it's not even like, this has more skin contact than red wines usually have. It smells vaguely like honey at this point. With the wine is basically gone from the glass now, but it smells really beautiful. Honey, apricot, like yellow peaches, cooked or baked yellow peaches. has a little bit of like a savory sort of baking spices thing on the mid palate. I hope that sort of illustrates how varied orange wines are, and that, you know, orange wine is a, like I said, a non-technical, non-legal, sort of open-ended, vague term or category. It's great that people are excited and interested in orange wines. You know, like anytime that somebody is excited about trying something new that they're not familiar with, you know, and they want to learn about something new, that's great. That's an opportunity, you know, to like talk to them and show them new things and have new experiences and tastes and stuff. That's really cool. It's just, I think people have to understand also, you know, orange wine, real orange wine, good orange wine is never going to be like $12 retail. You know, just by definition, making wine like this takes more labor. It takes more labor and it takes more time, and neither of those things are free. So orange wine is always going to be more expensive because it takes more work, and you know, and it's harder to make too. You need to be more technically skilled to make wine like this. It's not like taking in a whole lot of Sauvignon Blanc and just, you know, when it's slightly underripe, and processing it super quick and taking all the juice away and adding sulfur and inoculating it, and bing bang boom, you've got your whatever name you wanted to put on it, like fresh clean Sauvignon Blanc. To make orange wine like this and have it taste like those, like, you know, the Sasara that is really refreshing, and the Arancio that has beautiful fruit, and the Lovamore, and that Georgian wine that spends a month in Amphora that is still, to me, really balanced and clean and pretty and really enjoyable. To let the wine go through that process naturally of the skin contact and sort of like the secondary fermentations and other bacteria that are there that happens, to let that happen and not have it get messed up is really hard. That takes a lot of skill. The winemaker really has to be on top of their game and paying attention to do that. So orange wine is always going to be more expensive. It's just how it is. But I think it's really cool that it's been several years and people are still asking about orange wine, and they're still interested in it. And we're seeing more and more other wineries and other places try it out and experiment with things, and experiment with a bunch of those different techniques that I talked about. So that just, to me, it's just a cool sign of like the growth of the wine market and the increasing experience and knowledge of the consumers that we get to work with. I think that's it. Do any of you have any questions about any of this, or like these wines in general? Is there anything I can hey, you got the samples there, hooray! Great, now you can taste through them, Liz.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, I got lots of notes, so that's
Great.
great. I have a question. How do they get the wine out of the amphora? They look like they're embedded in rock.
Yeah.
How do they get the stuff off the bottom?
Yeah. With a pump, you know, they just,
Okay, and they just,
yeah, stick a hose down in the top, and just don't stick it all the way in, you know, and you suck the wine out, pump the wine out of it. I don't know. I believe I'm going to go back to screen share here. Yeah. Yeah, they're okay. They're big enough. So I believe that with an amphora like this, the only way to clean, you know, there's no hole, there's no hatch or access point or anything on the bottom of it. So the only way to clean an amphora out is you have to get down in it with a shovel and shovel whatever is in there. You have to shovel it out, and, you know, scrub it by hand, and then like let it dry out. That's the only way to clean one of those things. So that's another reason why wines made in amphora are more expensive, because it's more labor, and it's more like relatively difficult, unpleasant labor to climb down inside of one of those things and clean it out. So yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Mm.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Lynn.
I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.